Welcome to Real Life, presented by Chestnut Ridge Church. I'm your host, Jim Matuga. Today on Real Life, our topic is purpose in pain, and we'll be discussing the challenges, the issues, and concerns, and hopefully some practical solutions related to pain, and we'll explore finding your purpose in pain. Our goal is to give some professional, some practical, and even some biblical advice on how to help you and your loved ones not only understand what pain is, but some real ways to deal with this issue that's so prevalent in our community today. And we have a great panel of experts lined up for you today here in the studio. First of all, we have Joanne Davis Fry. She's a licensed professional counselor and co-founder of Stillwater Counseling in Morgantown. Joanne, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thanks for being here. You're a multi-guest episode guest with us, so it's great to see you again. Thanks for being with us. We have Sarah Giosi. Sarah is the owner of CrossFit Morgantown. Good morning, Sarah, and thanks for being with us.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And Bruce Lane. Bruce is the executive pastor at Chestnut Ridge Church in Morgantown and also leads a convene group here in the Morgantown area as well. Bruce, thanks for being with us.
Jim, it's great to be here.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. Again, we appreciate your time and expertise. As you guys know, experiencing pain is a part of normal life. And we all go through pain, whether it's personal pain, physical, emotional, relational, financial, or even pain in our jobs and our vocations and dealing with our work. So we've really assembled a group of expertise, a panel of experts here that are going to talk about how we deal with pain and hopefully gain some insight in how we really can get some purpose in going through that pain. So Joanne, I want to start with you. Let's jump right in here. From a professional perspective, as a clinical psychologist, talk a little bit about examples of pain that you see in your practice. Give us a start here.
In the mental health world, I'm kind of in the pain business.
Yes.
So I think we all different things. We see emotional, physical, mental pain. I think the majority of what I see would be probably relational, marriage, family, struggles, illnesses, injuries, trauma, emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, kind of across the board. We see all sorts of types of pain and suffering.
Yeah. So, Joanne, just kind of give us, some examples of like when you're talking about relational, like in a marriage, what are the overviews? Like, what are some of the big things that you're seeing out there in terms of pain and people that are dealing with?
I think that I always say that almost all pain can be reduced down to relational. Yeah. Almost any pain that presents. I think with marriage, we see a lot of different issues from communication to financial strain to transitions from, I think, parenting transitions, vocational transitions. Obviously, with the most recent the past few years here, COVID, there's been additional pressures and changes in work and school stressors. Severe situations with illnesses and death.
Yeah, life's hard, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, we think that life should be joyful, and we should be experiencing joy and pleasure and everything, but it can be really, really tough. Yep, and all the different things that you're talking about really add a lot of stress into that as well. So thanks for sharing some of those, sort of top level issues that you're seeing. Bruce, from your perspective as an executive pastor, obviously you've seen a lot of change in the church, especially over the last couple of years with the pandemic and so forth. Talk a little bit about pain from your perspective.
Yeah, it's interesting. 2+ years now, the pandemic, and our church. When you're running a church, it's kind of like running a business. Yeah. But it goes on every Sunday, right? So we pivoted from in-person to strictly online. Now we're back to online and in-person. And we've got to keep that machine going. But for those in our church family, some of them really missed, being Sunday in, Sunday out as part of a community there that would gather at the church. And so there was pain there. There was pain for them not to be able to gather.
Something's missing.
Again, something's missing.
Yeah.
And, as I looked at it, there might not be that direct pain for me.
Yeah.
But because other people are in pain, that does something, right? So we can experience pain because somebody else, a loved one, a friend, people in our church family are experiencing pain too. And again, nobody knew about the pandemic and that. So it was just a whole nother layer of trying to do that with the church, our church family, our own internal team, the staff there going through different things. And so it was really a unique time, and trying to help people go through that pain as well was just, everything was new.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah, how about from your perspective? You run a business, so you're in the midst of day in and day out dealing with different things, but you're also coaching people as well. You're a professional coach. Talk a little bit about that aspect and some of the things you're seeing in your world.
Yes. So I focus in on coaching complete wellness. That's what I call it. And in my definition, it's physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual. Yeah. Because we can look at the human body and just look at the physical side, which owning a gym, I do that a lot. But how we understand how the mind and the soul all works together, and that social community component, which is what you're talking about, and the shock I think that we saw with COVID, or gyms being shut down, or the whole world being shut down, that shock that came with it. And I think, and here's going to be the unpopular opinion first, frankly. Yeah, I think COVID is an interesting sort of magnifying glass on us as a culture and a society, where if we really were to delve into it, I think in a lot of cases, there wasn't even necessarily pain, but there was hardship. And how do we differentiate those things? Because in a lot of pieces of this, we're just, frankly, we've got it really good. Yeah. We've just got it so good, so that then whenever we start to see things get tipped, we don't know how to handle it. And that's where a lot of, I think, probably what you do, you're helping to figure out how to just deal with it, right? And I think that's hard, and that can be very painful. And then there's also these very deeper pieces of it. If we're talking about COVID, there were people that died. There were families that were hurt. There were businesses that were destroyed, And so there's sort of these varying levels of hardship and pain and how we deal with it. And that's part of what I do. I help people kind of differentiate and look at it and say, okay, and sometimes I'm just dealing with basic pain, like, how do we help you tie your shoes more comfortably? You know what I mean? Right. And then sometimes it's community pain.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And Joanne, I go back to what you were saying. Most of this pain is caused by relational issues, and I think everything that you guys are all talking about comes back to that.
And your relationship with self.
I mean, wow. It's so powerful. I remember, we're talking a lot about the pandemic and everything, and over the last 2 years we've had, because it's recent and we're still going through this stuff. Still dealing with it, and sometimes it seems like it was 10 years ago that happened, but it was 2 years ago. And I remember, and Bruce was part of my journey going back to 2019. I had a lot of issues in my life that it was my crap season, if you recall. I was like, everything is just crap right now, and it was interesting because I had no idea what was about to come. Going through 2019 and the beginning of 2020, I lost my father, and that was a really tough season of my life. And just watching him go downhill pretty quickly, and that was right before the pandemic hit. And then the pandemic hits, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be a cakewalk now. I've gone through all this stuff that I had in my world, but I keep going back to the relational things, and the people that we're surrounded by, and like Bruce, like you said, just the simple things that we took for granted, like being able to have community in a church and go on to worship and be able to to be amongst other people and kind of lean on them. Being with friends, we couldn't even see our friends. Joanne, talk a little bit about some of the things like that isolation. If you could, like, how did that affect people? And what you saw?
And I really like actually what Sarah just said. Because that's the truth. I think that there is COVID kind of put a magnifying glass on pain, but pain, I mean, that's human nature. It has always existed. If from the start of, when I started working with people in this capacity, I mean, pain and suffering really hasn't changed. Yeah. It's always the same. But I think what I think really, it almost as if it brought about more fear and unknown. And again, that's just in human nature. We do not deal well with that. So everything is kind of exacerbated at that point, from anxiety. And I mean, really the whole nature of COVID, it was unknown and change in routine. And I think loss of routine is what we grieved more than anything, because just joy-filled relationships and interactions and activities. And again, pain and suffering always exists. But I think when we can make things like predictable or almost when you think of like when we're depleted and then we get filled back up, COVID really stripped us of a lot of the things that allow us to fill back up, So again, I don't necessarily think that it was, all of a sudden, pain and suffering is more so the case with COVID. It's just highlighted. I think, honestly, like human weakness in a sense. And human nature.
JoAnn, from when we talk about loss of relationship, loss of community, but did you see an uptick in, I mean, obviously husbands and wives were spending more time together. A lot of times they were in isolation by themselves. Was there like an uptick or an increase in marital strife and relationship? Because I mean,
for sure,
you couldn't get away from each other. I mean, in a sense, I hate to say it that way, but was that a thing?
Not only that, and just the pressure behind changing pretty quick changes, abrupt changes, with kids' school routines and even working from home, or I think again a lot of fear around what will happen if I get this, or how am I going to protect my kids from it?
How long is this going to last?
How's it going to last? What does this mean for me? So relationally, everyone was squeezed tighter, and I think you see a lot of resentment and anger and anxiety and depression. Definitely an increase in drinking, which is over time addiction or drug use. I mean, we saw, how people cope with pain and suffering.
Well, one pathway to dealing with pain is numbing, right? Through self-medicating or whatever, right? And that's
so that was for sure a ripple effect.
Yeah,
and
we're still seeing that today.
Yeah,
I think the fallout from that and that type of thing. Bruce, from your perspective, I know you deal a lot with, in the church realm, but also from an HR perspective. Your prior career was in HR, and we've seen this great resignation that they call it, and people leaving the workforce and leaving their jobs and things like that. And with that comes a lot of pain as well, right? With the loss of maybe a pattern of going to work or going to this particular company. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one of the things that COVID did, people felt that pain was thrust upon them, right? I didn't have anything to do with it, but now I've got to change. I've got fear. I've got that from an external source. I'm sure there's internal pain as well with different things, but yeah, in many businesses, right? They were had to go to lockdown, so they worked from home, where there was hybrid and what, and employees felt, you know what, this is a pretty good deal. I can get my work done. I can feel that I mean, part of it was like, I've got kids in school. I've got to do all this. But what's come out of that is more, because of that pain, it's kind of a plus, because more of the employees felt empowered. And companies have been like, hey, we're coming back this date. And employers like, we're not coming back.
Yeah.
And so you had this great resignation that was really more than just layoffs and that. Now, sometimes the grass isn't always greener, and you've got the what they'll call the great regret, where people are like, I'll show you, I'm going to go to this company, and that company didn't fulfill the needs of that. But through all of that, with resignation or with layoffs and all that pain is, okay, how are we going to deal with this, right? There are still, I think it was last month, 4 million people in the United States quit, called the quit rate, 4 million. And we wonder why it's hard to hire people right now. And people are just like, I'm not going back. Some aren't going back because of fear. some are going back because it's like, this is a good gig.
Absolutely.
And so,
and it's pain for everybody. You know, the employers are
Exactly.
having to deal with this type of
Yeah.
issue for the first time, and probably ever, right? And the just trying to find a qualified applicant for a job is a difficult thing. Sarah, you were on the front lines of helping small businesses here in the Morgantown area. I remember being on a call with you. It was about this time 2 years ago, and you organized a call with small businesses that were members of the gym, CrossFit Morgantown.
Yeah.
And I remember you leading the way, just trying to be a support mechanism. Talk a little bit about, from a perspective of a business owner, some of the pain that you've had to endure just from that perspective. Trying to survive, a lockdown. You guys were closed for what, 6-8 weeks?
Oh, yeah. We were closed for, I think it ended up being a full 9 weeks. And then we opened in the middle of week 10, I believe.
Okay.
And so, yeah, there's the quick pivot. There's the full, you take your entire business model and just turn it
Flip
upside down.
Exactly.
And that does come with all of the stress and the anxiety and those things. But it's also, and this goes back to everything I think we've been talking about. When we think about pain, and actually you kept mentioning pain and suffering. Mm-hmm. And I think, again, differentiating the two, and the pain and the things that come at us that hurt versus sitting in it. Mm-hmm. And I think we make that choice. Now, I don't want people to mishear me and say, well, my suffering's not a choice. I don't know. I'm going to a little bit argue that point, that we can be hit a lot and that pain can build up. But to allow ourselves to sort of sit in it and wallow, I think that's where we get to the suffering side. Mm-hmm. And I think at some point we get to make the choice if we're going to let it be suffering or let it be pain. And it may be that we need help with making that choice. We may need resources. But I do think at the end of the day, that's something we get to help decide.
I couldn't agree more.
And from a business perspective, that's one of the reasons why getting each other in a room to say, let's make the choice to not suffer in this.
Yes.
Let's make the choice to not let us be statistically the businesses that close. Let's come out of this thing. Because when there is pain, there's transformation. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you can't have transformation without pain. You just can't. Yeah. Our logo at the gym is the Phoenix.
That's right.
And that's the entire idea, right? Is you go through the pain, but you come out on the other end changed. And I think when we don't embrace that part, that's where that fear and anxiety comes in. But also when we don't allow the transformation to take place, we have the transmission. Mm-hmm. So if you don't transform, you're going to transmit. And that's where some of these relational things come in, where because you're not accepting it, not that that's easy, not that it's easy to just go, okay, today I'll accept the pain. But when we don't, how we interact with others, not just our closest people, which I do think get the brunt of it, but also what is our community health? How do we start to evolve and look at it as an opportunity? Because without that pain, we don't have any gauge of what feels good either. Right. You talked about at the beginning, it's a part of the human experience by design. Yeah. Because if we don't have some of the pain and hardship and things that you have to work for, man, it sounds like a boring life without it.
Yeah, it's like having sunny and 78 degrees every day.
Yeah.
You got to have the storms to appreciate the sunshine.
Yeah, right?
So Joanne, from your thoughts, it sounds like you're agreeing with Sarah.
Yes.
I'd like to hear your perspective on this.
So this is the thing. I think that we all know people who are stuck in their pain, right? Yeah. And we have all been
it's sad,
people who have been stuck in our pain.
Exactly, yeah.
But if you think about it, like so often the pain persists until we find meaning in it, right? It'll just persist.
The purpose,
You know, and if there isn't, and if you aren't willing to look at it, and sometimes we have to be intentional, and we have to kind of go after looking for that purpose and that meaning. But if we don't do that, it just stays pain. It's only pain, you know? And I think that, like, from what I've seen too, there's like a correlate, whether we're talking biblically or how God uses pain for good, or there's kind of a correlative nexus between pain and purpose, right? So almost like the greater the pain, the greater the purpose. And I just think that's such, I guess I've just seen that time and time again. So it's almost like it's hard in those moments, and not that it looks pretty and from anxiety to depression. That's okay. I think it requires a lot of grace for sure.
Yeah.
Pain and dealing with our own pain or dealing with the pain in others definitely requires grace. But I think when we can kind of step back from that, there's so much beauty in it. I mean, from human connection to the things that really matter, vulnerability, humility, just. Again, I often think of pain as like that process, when I'm working with somebody in navigating pain, like what we're almost trying to bury, also like what is born out of that. And what's born out of it is almost
the phoenix rising from the ashes.
Again, so much greater than what is buried. And
exactly.
And
that's
and I think we all, again, and going back to the whole COVID thing, I think what was so difficult about COVID is we felt like we didn't have a choice. Freedom is taken away, and we do not do well with that. But if we actually, and that's the difference, this transition we're talking about here, when something is born out of it, we can actually choose to allow something to be born out of it. And when you can make meaning and purpose, almost anything, we can deal with almost anything.
Well, that's very powerful. Bruce?
I was just going to say, I think 2 good questions to ask when you're going through this is, what are you doing in your pain? And what are you doing with your pain? In your pain as I'm going through it, right? Okay, what am I doing? What can I do? But I think that next question, what are you doing with your pain, right? And I think if you can see that and work through it, there is the almost like freedom, right? Unshackled a little bit to be like, okay, there is purpose in that. What can that look like for me, right? We're not saying that, I'm in pain. Well, don't be in pain. I mean, that's not.
Right.
But I think. If you think about Job, right? And Job, a lot of pain. And his so-called friend.
Lost everything. Yeah.
And his so-called friends in the Bible, he lost everything, boils, everything, sitting there in pain, physical, mental, all of that. His friends tried to come and help, right? They weren't helpful. They basically what'd you do wrong? What this, whatever. You know what I mean? And so I think sometimes we've got to ask those questions ourselves and to other people, help me understand this, part of that community. But, in the pain and with the pain, I think there's some clarity of that coming out.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Thank you, guys. Sarah, I wanted to kind of turn to you and talk a little bit about personal pain. Obviously, a lot of folks know your story and the loss that you incurred with the loss of Jeff Giosi, your husband. You guys had an amazing marriage, amazing partnership, and suddenly he was taken from us last year. Talk a little bit about that experience from your perspective, and it was everything was great one day, and in a minute everything has changed. Your life is upside down.
Yeah, literally that morning. He kissed me goodbye and said, I love you. And I started making breakfast and I got a call. Hey, they're doing chest compressions. And even then I thought, tell him to walk it off. Because you have to know my husband. Like there was nothing about that I thought this was going to go the way it went. And so, yes, it was shocking. It was sudden. There wasn't a choice in it. And that's, something we're talking about a lot here. And in our case, just for contextual purposes, we have the most amazing marriage. I still say have because that's not in the past for me. Yeah. And we have 2 children. At the time that he passed away, a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, now 2 and 4. And we were business partners, and he was my coach, and we did the podcast together. So we were co-hosts. And I mean, we had so many areas of our life that were intertwined that I felt like I mourned each one individually. I lost each thing. And so that's interesting too, in that you have to kind of feel all of the different feelings. And I think going back to what I've already been hearing a lot, for me, and I think for a lot of people, whether it be COVID or any time we have a moment of pain, there's this loss of identity that can take place.
Sure. Yeah.
And I became a 33-year-old widow. That is not a new identity that I expected ever in my wildest dreams imagined.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you just mourn the old you sometimes as much as you mourn the person you're missing. And so going through that experience, though, again, it's for me, if I were to talk to somebody right now who is going through a really hard time, the very first thing and the thing that I think got me through this, besides my faith, is what you were saying earlier about that self-reflection side and understanding self really well. Doing that work, if you're not in pain now, do the work now and save yourself. But doing that work, because I can tell you that the first day after Jeff died, the easiest thing and the thing I wanted to do was just not get out of bed. And I'm telling you, if I would have done that day one, I don't know if I would have ever gotten out of bed again. I mean, it just hurt so bad.
Yeah, the pain.
But we had already established our values. And you don't get to pick and choose when you want to hold true to your values. They are there whether it's a beautiful, great day or a terrible day. And it was a terrible day. But one of our family values that Jeff and I established together was do hard things hard. And I thought, I'm going to do the hardest thing I can do today because I'm a Giosi. These are our family values.
This is what we believe in.
This is what we believe. And the hardest thing I could do that day was get out of bed. Wow. And sometimes that's the case, right?
Yeah.
And then after that, you do the next hard thing and the next hard thing. And this goes back to what you were saying, Jim, about you had lost your father. You had had a lot of just personal things. So that then whenever COVID came, you were like, I'm ready.
Yeah.
I think to some degree, it's the same idea of strength and conditioning, right?
Yeah.
We have to condition ourselves and prepare ourselves for the pain. And whether that be getting to know your personality type, getting to know you really well, understanding your values, putting yourself in moments of discomfort.
Yeah.
I think selfish, it's not even a plug because do this anywhere, but CrossFit Morgantown, here's 8 minutes of a really hard workout where you're going to be uncomfortable because the transformation comes out of that.
It's going to be terrible.
It's going to be terrible.
For 7 minutes or 8 minutes.
But
or
it's
whatever.
conditioning your brain, not just your physical body. It's more about that
You can
brain
do this.
side.
Yeah.
Yep.
You can do it. You're building the endurance.
Sarah,
So-
just listening to that story, I've told you this before, but you were such an inspiration, not only to me, but so many people, and not only in Morgantown community, but in the CrossFit community, people that knew Jeff, that knew you, that saw what you were going through, and the way that you handled that was just very powerful, and it was authentic. It was who you are, and I think that, when we are, I kind of look at it this way, when we're on the mountaintop, it's pretty easy to honor God and praise Him and say, wow, life is great. I always use the hashtag blessed, you see that people putting that, hey, I have a blessed life. But when we're in that valley, when we're in the darkest chasm that we could ever even imagine, or probably can't even imagine, right? Losing a loved one just like that, you were able to lean on your faith, to have trust in God, to do the hard things hard, to get up out of bed that next morning, and to be able to be, I remember watching that video that you produced. I can't remember how many hours it was after Jeff had passed, but you produced a video saying what happened, and I think tens of thousands of people saw this thing, and it was just like, wow, how does she find the strength? And the strength is from yourself. You were able to lean on that and lean on your faith and be able to inspire so many people with the way you handled that with such dignity and grace and strength. And it was just an inspiring thing to watch and witness. And I think about the Phoenix, and you were able to do that. And I remember at Jeff's memorial service, we had the guys had put together a massive Phoenix. I don't know how, it must have been like 15 feet tall.
Oh,
or
yeah,
something.
it was
16 feet tall.
feet tall.
And they lit it. It was in the rain, and it was just like this amazing thing. It was like this. Jeff couldn't have planned this any better. It was just a beautiful thing to watch this giant life-size or bigger than life Phoenix go up in flames, and it was just like, wow, it's an amazing story. And And Jeff has touched so many people, and his legacy lives on today. And obviously, you're continuing that legacy, especially with your boys and everything. But I think JoAnn, from going through the storms of life and being able to find that strength to pick yourself up, make yourself put a foot on the ground out of your, getting out of bed in the morning. That's a massive, not only is it a literal step, but it is a massive figurative step too, to say, I've got to get going. I got to get my life back on track here and pick up the pieces and go on. Right. Yeah. No matter how tough the loss is. And what Sarah described is such a powerful loss. And, a lot of us in the community went through that with you.
Yeah.
And so what are your thoughts on
Well,
that?
I think what Sarah did there was like, it's almost pursuing a purpose that outlasts the pain, right? You saying the first day after, I had this horrific thing. I mean, it's seemingly like unimaginable, and the very next day you pursued something that would outlast that, and probably will continue that the rest of your life. And I think sometimes without horrific experiences, sometimes we don't have the leverage to make an impact like that in the community, or in our own family or with your boys. I mean, I think that, and that kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier, and just that, like greater the pain, the greater the purpose. I mean, I really love that. And I think, and as human beings, and there's just there's so much pain and suffering, some to a small degree or to a large degree. And I think sometimes we can step away from that, or kind of transcend our earthly experience, like look at things from almost through the lens of God's purpose. The impact is just this exponential impact, just the ripple effect of that pain and suffering, that death, that loss, how it just had a ripple effect in our community, with your friend group, with boys, with the church. I mean, the impact, and that's the thing, none of that would have been possible without the loss, and again, as difficult as that is, I think it's just transcending that earthly experience for like the heavenly purpose, for God's glory.
It reminds me perfectly, JoAnn, of Romans 5, 3-5. As I was thinking about this topic, looking through the Bible for inspiration, it says, and I believe the Apostle Paul was writing this from prison, his letter to the Romans, Romans 5:3-5. Not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And I think about that, Sarah, you were talking about the endurance of an 8-minute workout and like the pain that you're going through, because that does produce character, right? Whether it's a workout, or it's going through a loss of a loved one, or it's going through a loss of a marriage, it's going through a loss of a job, whether it's going through whatever pain we're going through, we gain endurance from that, and that endurance is how we have hope. And I think that's something that really, in all this conversation, I think that's one thing that we can realize, is that our hope is in the Lord, right? And that's where we have to put our faith. Bruce, it looks like you're ready to jump in there.
Well,
I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I wish I'd wrote a quote down. It says, "Until you see purpose in your pain will remain painful." And I think talking about that and thinking about that, I think we all need time to grieve a painful situation. I think those that haven't grieved, it remains painful. There's always going to be some sort of pain, but kind of like, okay, you talked about Sarah taking the next step, right? If you didn't get out of bed, you probably what's the right or wise next step for me to do? I don't know what's going to happen a year from now. I just have to know what's going to happen with this next step, right? And I'm going to take this, and I'm going to have faith as I'm moving forward. I think that whole mindset, it just is important, right? Because you can sit in your pain, or you can do something with your pain, as we've talked about here. So, and thinking about how do we move forward? What do we do? We've seen so many good things that have come out of the last 2 years of COVID as well, because people figured things out, right? We have a saying, and we try to start figuring this out. Luckily, we started really investing in digital at our church probably December, January, before COVID happened, not knowing. Obviously, God did, but there's a scripture in Matthew and Mark that talks about no one puts new wine in old wineskins, right? So we talk about new wine in new wineskins, meaning what new thing do we have to do a new way, right? And as we think about that, as painful as things are, when you start to look forward, and be able to start to take those steps, you're not throwing away your pain, but that's helping you, whether it's an organization or individual, right? What are you moving towards? Another scripture in Isaiah says, behold, I'm doing a new thing. Don't you see it? And a lot of times I'm like, I do not see it. Right? But that doesn't mean that new thing's not happening. And if you can be like, okay, I'm just going to step out in faith.
Yeah.
I'm just taking one step. I don't have to be down here.
You don't have to take a leap of faith.
I don't
take
have
a step.
to. Yeah.
Take one step. Yeah.
So that's just
powerful.
kind of what I would say is what we've seen is being okay to grieve the loss. Yeah. And that might take a while, but during that, right, what are our next wise steps?
Yeah.
I think it's important too. So in my case, and especially if you were in this community or you saw it, mine was very visual. You could see, I could hear the stories. I could see almost immediately the impact that Jeff had made and the impact that perhaps his death could have. So I was really fortunate in that. I think it's harder in the moments where we have pain and you're not able to see what it is that's happening in that very moment. And that can be discouraging. Yeah. And I've had a lot of people ask me very, very point blank, well, how can you still believe in a God that would just kill Jeff? And this is where I think we have to be careful about our one-sided nature and our negativity bias, because if I were to then lay out for you, again, I was 33 when Jeff passed. If I were to lay out for you the daily, amazing, beautiful, just like can't even wrap my brain around amazing things that have happened in my life, I've had this really awful experience. And it's profound. And it's big, but we tend to neglect to remember all of the amazing beauty too. And I don't think that's fair. And whether you are a believer, if you're a Christian monotheist, or even if you look at things like the Buddha, or there's still these ideas of how we are looking at things a little more fairly, frankly, and that there's a lot of good in the world. And actually, if you start to look at that, there's a lot more good than the bad.
Yeah.
And I think COVID, a lot of people, a lot of us, and maybe even now when we start to look at Ukraine or we start, we can look at things and just go, all the bad stuff. And we're not looking at our amazing lives around us.
There's a question that I ask myself. I ask my kids. I probably ask the folks I coach when we're going through these things is, what do you still know to be true about yourself? Yeah. And what do you know to be true about God? Yeah. Right? Because that starts getting that, well, I think this or that, or the chatter that you hear, go back to what do you know to be true? And if you, again, can focus, can put that stake in the stake in the ground or flag in the ground and be like, okay, this is what I know to be true. I know it's true about me. I know it's true about God. Then I think it's easier to... It's just easier to move forward because you've got that anchor that hey, this is what we're doing.
Absolutely. I had one of my mentors, probably in the last 10 years or so. His name was John Rogers. He started the small group that I'm in at Chestnut Ridge. He's since moved to Florida, he and his wife Courtney. And John used to tell me, basically that when you're going through a tough time, you have to praise God for that. Mm-hmm. You have to acknowledge that he has put this in your path for a reason. And I never understood that. I could never grasp that even as an adult and until he would repeat that to me. And it reminded me of I first heard the song by Casting Crowns, Praise You in the Storm, one of my favorite praise songs. And that song is so beautiful because it's about praising God in the storm of life, the pain, the trials, the tribulations. And I remember it was a couple of years ago, Rebecca and I were at the state fair in Lewisburg, West Virginia State Fair, and Casting Crowns was on the stage, and we didn't have tickets. It was a sold-out show, but we could hear them playing, and there was a thunderstorm rolling through, and it's pouring the rain. And they started singing "Praise You in the Storm," and I'm standing there in the rain, going, "Yes, Lord, I praise you." And it was such a powerful thing. But I think what I'm hearing, especially Sarah, from your perspective, and that story, with Jeff and how you made it through, is that you almost have to embrace that pain because you know that there's something coming from it. As long as you can, keep your faith, keep your eyes focused on what's ahead, not what's in the past. And, I quoted the Apostle Paul in Romans a few minutes ago. I'm going to also, quote Mr. T. and Mr. T used to say, "Bring the pain," right? So almost like that has to be a mindset, right? It's like we have to welcome the pain because especially if we go through it with a mindset that there is a purpose here, I'm going to figure out what it is. Maybe some perspective on that. It's hard to follow a Mr. T quote, but if you could jump in there.
The only thing, as everybody's talking and I'm listening, I also think, especially for people that are maybe listening to this that aren't believers, that are going, what? Like none of this is feeling right and none of it's making sense. Yeah. I also think in the pain is an opportunity to challenge. And I think it's okay. I don't think that there are... First of all, and maybe you can actually speak to this from a psychological level, but we all are going to face it differently, whether it be our personality types or our circumstances or the people that are in it with us, or like everything is going to be totally different. And I may even face it differently today than I do tomorrow. Yeah. We're just so ever evolving. Grief is not linear at all, whatever kind of grief it is, whether it be the loss of a loved one or a job or identity, whatever. It is not linear. And I think a lot of times, again, back to shaking my finger and saying our society today, I don't think we talk about loss very well. I don't think we talk about pain very well. And I don't think we do enough talking about the fact that it's not going to look the same for everybody. And it's not even the idea of the stages of grief. Yeah. People don't realize that was a study that was done on people that were they themselves dying. That's very different. Like coming to acceptance, and that's very different than if you've lost someone. Yeah. Those are two different things. And so we tend to reference and think, well, I'm at this stage today, so that means I'm through this part, and tomorrow I'll be at this stage. That is not how it works, right? Yeah. In a minute to minute, they call them the grief bombs, you may have this overwhelming feeling of, whoa, why did I just get so sad? Yeah. And it comes. Pain, I think, is just something we live with. And so I think that to me is really important to make a note on in a conversation about pain. There is no specific path to pain, even in yourself, even as you're maybe trying to plan out how I'm going to get through this. Yep. It's not how it works. You have to be able to go with it. Yep. And when we talk about the phoenix, or I would argue, look at Jesus, right? The living phoenix. We have a person who went through pain and then resurrected. Yeah. That is not an accidental story for us. Yeah. I don't believe, unpopular opinion number 2, I don't believe that Jesus had to come and die on the cross for us. I believe it was a choice that God made. God's all powerful. I think to say he had to do this or else we won't be saved is really sort of belittling. Yeah. It was a choice made through that Trinity to have this happen so that we could watch it and we could understand resurrection and we could understand how to put that into our own lives.
That's a great perspective. Yeah. I think about, Jesus too, he was going through pain, especially in his last days, and he even prayed to God, the Father, and said, if this cup may pass, right? Yeah. And do I have to, not that he was saying, I don't want to do this, but you could almost sense that, right, in his thoughts.
And this idea is taught continually throughout Scripture. Yeah. I mean, that's what just even some of the, some of the Scripture that you both mentioned. I mean, I have a few here too that, in 2 Corinthians 12, that is why for Christ's sake I delight in weakness, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. James verse 2-4. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials, so pain of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. And I think, and it looks different. It day to day, it can look different. It can feel different. We might have to work and be very intentional about grounding ourselves that day. Kind of like you said, I always say, like, rest in your truth. What is my truth? What is God's truth for my life? I mean, one day that may be extremely difficult, and other days that may be easy. So I think perspective is such a big part of being human,
Absolutely.
regardless.
I like the way Sarah put it, grief bomb.
The grief bomb, yep.
Because I it's been a couple years since my dad passed, and that was like the most painful thing I've endured for a while.
Yeah.
But I have those still, like I'll be going through some of his things, he left me a little coin collection. I'm like, man, I can't believe my dad's gone, and it's just like, it hits me, and I'm like sad and sorrowful, and it's like 2 years later, I'm still feeling those things, and it's just like, and it makes me appreciate my mom, and my mom and I, have a very interesting relationship. I love her to death, but there's some days where I don't like her very much. But but I sit there and go, okay, how do I make that right? Gives me motivation to say, I don't want to have this.
It's
regrets.
interesting in the book of Psalms. There's, I don't say everyone, but a lot of them. David is coming to God. I'm shaking his fist. How long?
Yeah.
How long? I mean, pain. How long? Usually by the end of that psalm, but I will trust in you. But and so kind of what we're talking about, not letting your pain be known. God wants us to come to Him and tell Him how we're feeling. That's why it's why He created us with feelings, right? They're not wrong.
He already knows.
You
right?
you can be sad.
He knows what we're thinking.
You can be through all of this. So, but I'm thinking too about in 1 Peter 5:7 talks about God being the God of comfort, right? Casting all your anxieties, casting your pain on Him because He cares for you. And I think sometimes when I'm going through situations, people, do I believe that? Sarah, they asked the question, how can you believe in whatever? Do I believe that going through whatever, God still cares for me? I know the end of the story written in the Bible, right? But I don't know how that's going to look for my life. And maybe there's things I'm never going to know. Maybe there's some pain that we'll finally realize, oh, that's what it is at the end of our life. That's what that is. But do I believe? Do I have hope? Do I have all those as I go through this? That He cares for me. He knows what's best for me. There's a reason for that. And again, that's a mindset, right? And there can be a mindset where people walk away because they, like you said, Sarah, no good God could do this.
Yeah.
So
I also think we have fear and shy away from, again, challenging that and saying to God, how could you do this?
Yep.
Yeah. I think we tend to put God in our little human earthly boxes, and we think He can't handle us asking Him questions. Come on, of course He can. You know what I mean? I think it's okay to wrestle with God. You might come out with that broken hip, but you can do that.
Yeah.
And I don't think we should shy away from it. In fact, I think that's what a real relationship is. It's the transparency. And instead of just fully pulling away saying, this doesn't make sense. Why would you do this? Why are there starving children? These are the questions that people that don't have a faith-rooted belief system have. And those are good questions.
Yeah.
Ask them. Challenge them. And let's figure out, what role do we as believers play in helping to address that and answer them and participate in fixing them, Pain is there. It's all around. It's part of the human experience. That's why Disney's so popular. Every single one of those movies starts with some huge conflict that then these characters come into their own and they become the hero, Right?
Yep.
And so how do we as a church, how do we as individuals, whatever your belief system may be, seek that out and become the hero of these painful stories?
And I think it there can be an onus on us, right? I know someone's going through pain. I know if I enter into that, now I've got to do something, right?
Mm.
God, what do you want me to do? How do you want me to walk alongside, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just, I'm walking alongside you. You let me know what you need, right?
Yeah.
Other times it's God has put me in a position to help, whatever that is. But I think sometimes it's like, ooh, there's a painful situation, not mine. God's asking me to enter into, and I'm like, oh boy, here we go. Right? Because if I step into that,
Exactly. Yeah.
now I'm committed. Like,
Yeah.
I can't get right. And so I think part of that is we talk about community, we talk about friendships and all that, so that people don't have to walk alone through their pain, right? They don't have to be doing this. And, well, I know what you're going through. I don't know what you're going through, but guess what? I'm going to be here for you.
Yeah.
That's what a friend does. That's what a community does.
You mentioned Job's friends and how they weren't very helpful.
Not helpful.
And I would completely agree. There is a part, though, that I would argue that they were helpful, and that's the part where they came and just sat.
Well, yeah.
And they didn't say anything,
Yeah.
but they were present,
Yes.
because I think that's also okay. To just come and sit. That part was actually very helpful
Yeah.
to him.
Yeah.
Just come and be.
Yep.
Yeah.
We
Absolutely.
don't have to have the answers. We don't have to solve other people's pain,
No.
nor should we.
Yeah.
Again, let it be theirs. Let them have that. But I love that. Even as you were saying it earlier, I was thinking, there's one moment where they just showed up.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
that part's great.
It's important
Yeah.
because those are practical things we want to offer as takeaways too
Yeah.
for folks that are listening to this podcast today. Obviously, having community, being there, being present for people that are going through pain, right, is an important thing. I always remembered a piece of advice I got one time. It said, if somebody's going through a difficult time, more than just saying, if there's anything I can do, just let me know. Well, typically you're not going to reach out and say, hey, can you bring a meal tomorrow? But if you offer to say, hey, we would like to bring you guys dinner tomorrow or Thursday night, that's a specific thing. And you can say, okay, yeah, that sounds great. But being a little bit specific, I think could be a good thing. I always think, especially when people are going through very traumatic pain, JoAnn, I think it's, professional counseling is an important thing.
Yeah.
So maybe if you could speak a little bit about some practical advice from a professional standpoint, see people are thinking about reaching out and seeking some professional guidance.
Yeah, I think it's multifaceted. I mean, the approach to healing and to pain, I think it's a lot of really considering some of the things we talked about today. I think like actually questioning your pain.
Yeah.
Where can I go from here? What can I learn from here? How can I serve and help others from this? I think again, doing a lot of that work, internal work, but also when we can't do that or we can't even face ourselves or where we are, to reach out to our community of like support, to support options within the community. I think for obviously professional counselors or people who have that skill level to help.
Yeah, going through a process.
Yeah,
right? A professional process, having a guide along with you.
But I think also just the fight,
Yeah.
the maintaining like hope and openness and excitement about what this could mean.
Yeah.
I think
What's on the other side?
Yeah,
of the
and I
coin.
think
Yeah.
hope is such a critical piece. Firstly, being, allowing for grace and the vulnerability and just kind of the gritty part of it. But also, I think to if you could kind of elicit hope, that's a great starting point. And I think the enemy, from a Christian standpoint, the enemy will capitalize on pain and suffering. I mean, you see, again, from Jesus being tempted to us and just our human nature being tempted, he wants to separate us from God and from others. Again, going back to relational stuff, if he can get us, we stay stuck in that pain.
Yeah.
If he can separate us from God and separate us from other people, there's a stronghold there.
There's an old adage that says time heals all wounds, right?
Mm-hmm.
And is that true? Is time help with that or no?
No, again, I don't.
I reject that statement.
Yeah. I don't I don't believe it's true. I think we could reframe things. We can use things for good. Again, we can kind of transform pain, but I think some pain is there with us till the day we die. We may not understand it.
Right.
Like we said, again, it's that human lens of how we view life, and then kind of transcending that and looking at it through a godly lens. I think that's the difference.
And with that, going back to your question about how to support others, and even you were just talking about 2 years later, you have these moments. I think it's also it's really easy, and this is not me. I do this. This isn't me talking about my experience. But in the moments right after somebody has a trauma or a crisis or devastating pain, we all show up and we swarm and we're ready to help. And then 2 years later, that pain hasn't necessarily it may feel different. You may be living with it in a different way, but you still have those moments. And so I think remembering that it might be 2 or 3 years after, someone has lost a child that you say, can I bring you dinner tonight?
Yeah.
And that might just be exactly the thing
that they need.
Yes, because also having other people remember can be a huge part of it. I think some of the pain comes from, again, this loss of identity, or in my case, right? I lost my husband. Well, does that also mean I've lost my couple friends? You know what I mean? Now all of a sudden I'm the seventh wheel. Or how do you kind of transparently have that conversation and say, I love you guys, I don't want to lose you too? Yeah. Or how do you show up for people in other ways, knowing things have changed, and let's not ignore it.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I pulled up a quote here, and it just reminded me what you were saying. It says, just because someone carries it well doesn't mean it's heavy.
Doesn't mean it's not heavy.
It doesn't mean it's not. Yeah, sorry. It doesn't mean it isn't heavy. So 2 years out, right? Wow, Sarah's doing great, right?
Yeah.
Or a year out. Is that true? Jim's doing great.
Yeah.
So I think, one of the things is just making sure you're in community, right? Where you've got people being asked, how are you doing? Yeah. And I'm doing fine. No, really. How are you doing? And because that's the friend, that's the person who, that come alongside, or the person that just has interest in you a year out, a year and a half out, 2 years, who really has that genuine care for you. And, it goes back to isolation, right?
Yeah.
We talked about that. Some people take their pain, they're going to try to deal with isolation. It's any wonder that it's harder.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Having that peer group or that group with you. So.
That's good stuff. Guys, as we close out our time, I thought what we could do is kind of go around with any parting thoughts. First of all, I'd like to start with you, Sarah, and thank you so much for sharing your personal experience, especially with the passing of Jeff and everything that you went through. I really appreciate that. It's a powerful story. Do you have any parting thoughts for us?
Ooh, so many parting thoughts. No, I would say the biggest one is to remember that we all go through pain. Find your community. And this may be an opportunity to expand that community. I didn't have a lot of widow friends before. Now I have a ton, and to find some new ways to explore this with people can also be really good. Grief support groups. And I know the church does that a lot. And there's a lot of different things. Don't be closed-minded to the experience. As hard as that is to say, or how that sounds, be open-minded to the ways in which you can kind of approach it day to day, and just be kind to yourself.
Yeah. Great wisdom. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
Joanne.
Again, as you asked that question, I have so many parting thoughts probably here. But yesterday, actually, I got something sent to me. It was a little excerpt from a T.D. Jakes sermon, and it's funny because I wrote it down just thinking that this is what we were going to be talking about today. And I think it wasn't just a coincidence that this kind of showed up yesterday. So I'm just going to read that. I think this would be a good place to close. Great. And he was talking about, again, this is just a little excerpt from his sermon. He said, if grapes could scream, they would cry from the pain of becoming wine. But if they can endure the pain of the crushing and trust the vintner, who would be God our Father, to take me through this process, my latter days will be greater than my former days. And finally, I will be more valuable and worth more, only because I have been crushed. And I love that when we think about pain, like just in the moment, like you said, like in the moment, whether it's today or it's lasting for 2 years or 4 years, like sometimes we don't we don't think of it in that way when we have those crushing blows or those moments of sadness or desperation. But I think really just embracing that and being, again, loving to ourselves and grace filled, and just being patient, I think, with ourselves, and really considering that, like, what beauty has come from me being crushed, you know?
It's so good.
So
thank you, JoAnn.
You're welcome.
Bruce. Oh, Sarah.
I just want to add,
Sarah wants to
and
add
how do
something.
we serve others through it?
Yes.
Back to this whole
that's
point
great.
of purpose. How do we serve others through our pain?
Yeah.
And
That
I
should
even
be
like
the
it. I
bigger
know, and I
takeaway.
even like that for that reason, because it's almost as if, and basically if I would have continued on with this sermon, he talked about that wine, and now it was this grape, and now it's wine who is served across nations, for people's enjoyment or like community and connection, and
it's really great.
But
great
anyway,
stuff.
that was the next
Yeah.
that was the next part of the sermon.
That's
actually.
awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Bruce.
Well, I mean, I think what both of you said and what we've been talking about, but I think, knowing that you're either in pain now, you've gone through pain, or you will go through pain, right? So as we talked about, maybe spending time thinking, okay, if these things are going to come at me, almost have a plan of what you can do, or at least, like I said, that anchor or the stake in the ground to be like, I get it. This is going to happen. It could happen. I don't know how it's going to happen. Sometimes we say, well, my pain's not as much as your pain, so I'm not going to deal with that, right? It's like, where are you? Be super realistic about where you are. Be optimistic where you want to go.
Yeah.
And just take those next steps.
To paraphrase another great song, another in the fire, we'll find the joy come every battle.
Yeah.
And I think that's powerful stuff. Guys, I think it's a great place to close out our time with you all today. It's a fantastic panel talking about finding purpose in your pain. Joanne Davis Fry, licensed professional counselor and co-founder of Stillwater Counseling in Morgantown. Thank you so much, Joanne.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. Sarah Giosi, the owner of CrossFit Morgantown. Sarah, thank you for sharing your story, and thanks for being here. Yeah, awesome. Wisdom. And Bruce Lane, the executive pastor of Chestnut Ridge Church in Morgantown, and also leader of Convene in West Virginia as well. So, Bruce, thank you guys.
Thank you.
I think this has been an awesome time. Bruce, if you wouldn't mind closing us out in prayer.
Father, thank you for our time this morning. Thank you that there is purpose in our pain. Even if we don't want to go through the pain or are not sure why there's pain, you do. And you are the great comforter so we can get through that pain. So thank you for just the wisdom of this group here. And we give it all to you. In your son's name we pray, amen.